Tonight it's all things Jayhawks. Grab a drink and join us on the tailgate. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on another episode of The Tailgate. As always, I am Luke, and I'm joined with Michael, me, and this guy, Dennis.
Oh, I was like, you forgot my name. I was like,
I didn't forget. I was telling Dennis. I'm saying this guy. This guy over here. And today we are joined by Andy Mitz from the Rock Chalk podcast on the 1012 Podcast Network. Andy, how are you doing, man?
Doing pretty good. Happy to be talking Kansas football and it not be something people are dreading.
That does seem to be a little bit of a trend that the Kansas fans have a little more excitement, a little more to talk about and be happy about.
Football team.
Yeah, it's also weird. You know, this is the third year in a row that people are legitimately excited going in and expecting them to take a step forward as opposed to just not being horrible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, the first question before we get too deep into the coaching and the players and all that, we like to know just how the guys that come onto our podcast, how did you become a Kansas fan?
So I went to KU. I actually moved out to the Kansas City area when I was a kid, about 10 years old. Obviously fell in love with KU basketball. I kind of followed a little bit of K-State football as well because that was the team that was good at the time. But really, it was more of the only team I really identified with was KU basketball.
Okay.
But then I got a nice scholarship to KU and really wanted to go there anyway for, I wanted to do law and they have a really good law school. Changed my mind on that pretty quick once I actually got to college. But, I'm one of those people that once I sign on with a school or, once I affiliate myself with something, I jump into it completely. So,
nice.
Yeah, I became a Kansas City Chiefs fan. I became a Kansas City Royals fan. We moved out to Kansas City and it's like, went to KU. Now I absolutely love the Jayhawks. And I can tolerate the Wildcats.
It makes it funny story. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and my mom went into labor at a Kansas City Royals game. So, a water broke on the Kansas City Royals game. So there we go. Hey, I got a connection. But anyway, we won't get too far into that.
I would say I don't think we need to go into detail.
Yes, no, we'll move on quickly.
I don't know how to follow up to that.
There is no. Just pretend it didn't happen and move on.
So I guess with the water breaking and everything.
I would say that's what we tend to do about the 2000s for football.
So pretend it never happened. Just awkward. I mean, it seems like I guess it's kind of started with it could be the first time I guess in about 100 years in 3 consecutive seasons that Kansas has actually potential to be able to be 4-0, which it's literally been 100 years since that last time that happened. I mean, I feel like with the head coach you guys have with excuse me, how am I blinking?
Leipold,
basically.
Lance Leipold.
Leipold, okay. With Lance Leipold, he's doing a great job, and I feel like what's the energy that's kind of being given around Kansas? Like it seems like a whole new life is actually just existing there now.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, ever since you went back to when Mark Mangino got fired, and all of the debacle that happened there, the athletic directors have had a hard time identifying the kind of guy that they want, what kind of program they want, and then picking somebody who can actually put that sort of program together.
Mm-hmm.
Lance Leipold is the first guy, I think, that we've felt that not only does he have a clear vision of what we want his team to be and what he expects from his program, but what he does is actually consistent with that. You have Charlie Weiss, who used to talk about, hey, we're going to, he was introduced with the infamous, I went out to find the best and I found Charlie Weiss. That's how he was introduced at his starting press conference. And immediately, the very first thing that Charlie Weiss talked about is how much, how the players on the roster are a bunch of crap, and that you're going to have plenty of playing time. That was his recruiting pitch. Like the fact that, it's been bad.
Sounds like a Colorado coach.
Yeah. Even like Les Miles, right? Like he came with a whole bunch of excitement, and you expected him to do a lot of this stuff, and then when he actually got on the field and the things that he actually was doing with his program, you just didn't see the connection.
Yeah.
So it was really hard. I think for fans to really embrace what's going on. But Lance Leipold's been very upfront and very direct about, hey, this is the plan. This is the way that I plan on running my program. I've run every single program that I've ever run this way.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you can expect to see. And so far, he's delivered on everything and not results. Like, that's not the part that people were expecting from him. It's the consistency. It's the, he made a really big effort when he came in rather than just cleaning house. His big thing was talking about consistency. What's the very first thing he did? He only brought half of his staff with him. The other half was guys that were here at Kansas. He found the guys that fit into his system that he could bring in to give consistency to those guys. So, right away, rather than cleaning house and saying, I want to rework the entire thing, we realize there's good pieces of what you're doing. We want to build on those. We want to keep things consistent and build a foundation for you. And that's what we've seen every year. Kansas does not make a lot of changes. The way that their schemes are run, the way that they've, built up the system, the way that they run practices, all of that has been very consistent. It's just the people that are different in different roles. And that's really, I think, what you're seeing. Even as Kansas has started to lose assistants, as guys have moved on to other opportunities, they've gone and found guys that are fairly similar or have very high pedigrees, but are willing to come in and add to the system rather than change the system that's there. And I think that's really what you're seeing from the Jayhawks every year, and why they've been able to be successful the last couple of years, is that they haven't tried to rework everything. They've literally just said, hey, we know what worked last year. We know what didn't work last year. Let's make some tweaks. Let's, keep the same basic, but also kind of that being confident enough in what they're doing that they don't feel like they have to redo everything. And that's because that's what Kansas has done for the last 15 years prior to Leipold coming in was, hey, this isn't working. Let's tear it all down and start new, and hopefully that one will work.
Yeah, and it's nice too because Leipold was also tied right to the Washington job this past year. And also back when Mel Tucker had his stuff, there was a lot of talk about him moving on to Michigan State, or at least being Michigan State.
Well, and then the year before that, when Nebraska and Wisconsin were open, he was linked both of those immediately.
Yep.
Yeah, I think what he's been able to do at Kansas very quickly was not really a surprise if you follow him. I do think that some of the results on the field were successful, or very more successful than you might have thought. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that, look, Les Miles was a great recruiter in terms of bringing in raw talent. He just didn't know what to do with it when it got there. Unless he's got an entire roster full of, 5-star guys or 4-star guys, it's hard to kind of, take the guys that you have to develop. If you're not a coach that's used to developing guys, you're used to just utilizing talent that you have. Leipold, that's what he does. He takes guys, he finds guys that nobody else really wants, or guys that have been kind of underappreciated, and figure out how to get the best out of them and how to mesh them into something that actually works. And you've seen that. Like, his recruiting classes have not been the highest rated recruiting classes. He's definitely been, I think, better. He started to get better recruits, and we've actually seen that with recent commits. He's starting to get higher and higher level of talent, but the goal has always been, let's find somebody who fits in my system, who fits here and is like a Kansas player and a good representative of the university that we want.
Yeah.
And can also play football like that. But the focus is making sure that the consistency, that the camaraderie, that the way that this program is built does not get sacrificed for a super talented player.
Sure. And now, speaking of the super talented player, though, you've got Jalen Daniels, right? And it's very surprising to me that there are not more national people talking about this guy. I know that he obviously was hurt last year. He got hurt last year, but he's also the guy that led the team to that upset win at Texas back in 2021, right? With 23 touchdowns and what was that, like 2,700 yards in the past 12 games that he's played. So besides like, oh, it's just Kansas and he was hurt, is there any other reason why people aren't talking about Daniels, or, what are you seeing for him?
No, it's really what you typically will see, because he had all that hype last year. Last year, he was Big 12 offensive player, or preseason offensive player of the year.
Right.
He was a guy that people were talking as a dark horse Heisman candidate. He was kind of the face of the program, and honestly, one of the bigger names in the Big 12 in terms of people that wanted to find somebody. And then he got injured, and he wasn't able to really do much with it. And, as we all know, the way that the sports world is, you either put up huge numbers or people move on.
Yeah.
And so he's going to have to kind of reintroduce himself, I think, to a lot of people. There's plenty of other guys. You hear about Cam Rising coming in with Utah, or you hear about Noah Fifita with Arizona. Like, there's new shiny things that people want to look at as potentially the guy. Jalen Daniels, he's going to be quote unquote new enough, I think, for this year, because we haven't seen him play significant minutes in the last full season. And honestly, like the last performance that most people remember from him I'm sorry, the BYU game was the last one from him, but he didn't really necessarily have to do a whole bunch there with the way the running game was playing. The lasting memory I think a lot of people have from him from last year was just going on the road to Nevada and not playing very well because he was intentionally being held from running the way that he normally runs because they were worried about his back injury, which ultimately he, was out. So he's a guy I think that he's kind of come out of the spotlight, so people aren't willing to kind of highlight him, I think, as much. Plus, you have a ton of other really talented guys on the Kansas offense. You've got Devin Neal, you've got you've got Daniel Highshaw, that running back duo that honestly makes up the core of what multiple people have, listed as one of the top 5 running back rooms in all of college football, not just the Big 12. So, you have that. You have a very talented, number one in the NFL wide receivers, but you have a huge stable of wide receivers who have put up huge numbers. You actually had two wide receivers last year in Luke Grimm. And then, I'm mixing them all up. Lawrence Arnold. That they both set the record for the guaranteed rate bowl in that bowl with the number of touchdown passes they had at 3. So it's like you have guys that have put up some huge numbers, but no one who stands out because of the way that Kansas plays in their offense.
Sure.
I do think the way the Kansas offense is set up is that it's hard actually to be an individual contributor that stands out unless you are the quarterback, and so. The fact that Devin Neal has been able to do that and get that recognition, and Daniel Highshaw has, it's been great for them, and I think it's been great for this program to show just how talented and deep that they are. But until Jalen Daniels comes in and can remind people of just how great he is and what he's able to do, I think that a lot of people are going to kind of forget because there's way too many new shiny things.
Yeah, now that totally makes sense. And you've hit a bunch of the offensive weapons that you have there. So we'll just kind of fast forward to the offense there. But on your defense, who are some of the guys that you're really looking to kind of start having that standout year? Is there a player that you're exceptionally excited about, or just kind of excited for the whole defense in particular?
I mean, it's kind of funny because Kansas has had a really good defensive secondary for quite a long time, and it's typically getting lost because Kansas. The big thing is that when you want to attack Kansas, you attack them in the running game, and that keeps their defensive secondary from really being able to do too much. But Big 12 has always been a very offensive heavy conference in that they have a ton of teams that can put up a ton of yards really quick and really good passing games. Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson, though, I think as a cornerback duo, you actually look at what they did last year, and both of them individually were performing at levels very similar to some of the top guys that went in the draft last year. And so they didn't get as many opportunities. They didn't get as many high-profile opportunities. I don't necessarily blame people for not quite understanding just how well they played. If you look at Pro Football Focus and things like that, Kansas has probably some of the best returning defensive secondary players in all of the nation.
Sure.
Just because you have, 4th and 5th year seniors that have been on this roster for a really long time, have some really good coaches, and have a good awareness of the ball, but also that that ball hawk mentality, willing to go in and try to find the ball. Kobe Bryant, I think, is the perfect example of that. In the West Virginia game 2 years ago, they get into overtime and he gets a pick 6 after Kansas has already scored, where he just jumps a route and takes it all the way back, even though he didn't have to at that point. But it's kind of that mentality.
Why not?
right, exactly. You have the opportunity to score. How often can you say, "Hey, we beat a team by 2 touchdowns in overtime"?
Right.
True.
You can't usually do that. So, but I mean, this is a team I think that's been hungry, and a defense that's been hungry. They feel like they've been disrespected, and I mean, a lot of that I think is okay. It's fair because this is a front 7 that's had some issues. They have a lot of turnover on that front 7. The last 3 years straight, they've had their top pass rusher who's moved on, usually to go to the NFL. You had Lonnie Phelps, who ran out of eligibility. You have, Austin Booker, who got drafted this year after, he had a breakout season with the Jayhawks. So they have plenty of guys who have come in through the transfer portal that have had huge years. And they have a group of really great guys that you expect this year are going to have similar, they have guys that look very similar this year to what we've seen from them in the past. The question is going to be, who is the guy that actually steps up, not if there's going to be a guy.
Sure.
So with all that said, what do you think is going to be what's your prediction for this upcoming season? You guys have probably one of the more favorable schedules in the Big 12, and we've been saying this for weeks. We think the Big 12 is probably the most competitive conference in all of college football, just because you've got a lot of teams that are about the same talent level, and so it really could go any way. And so even though you guys might have a more favorable schedule, it always can kind of seem like a toss-up. But what do you think is going to be the case for this year?
Yeah, I think it's not only that they have a favorable schedule, but they also have a favorable home-away split.
Sure.
I mean, you look at who they play and where they play them. With the exception of the Kansas State game that's in Manhattan, every single one of their games, the harder ones are at Arrowhead. The other ones are going to be on the road. Like I'm not expecting. I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not expecting teams like Houston. I'm not expecting teams like I just completely blanked. Arizona State, right, to really put up too much of a fight against the Jayhawks with the way that their offense is able to play.
Sure.
You miss Utah, you miss Arizona. You don't have to play either of those. You miss Oklahoma State. The other teams that are probably going to be competing up at the top. So you really there's actually a decent chance with this team, especially if the offense is going to be, if Daniels doesn't get injured, knock on wood there, and they're able to kind of do what they're expected to do there. And the defense isn't just god-awful all year long. This is a team that has a legitimate shot of going, 10-2, 11-1 in the regular season and find themselves in Arlington. And I don't think it's crazy to think that Kansas should be one of the favorites. I mean, you look at ESPN's FPI, Kansas is the best rated team in the Big 12.
Sure.
And that's the raw rankings. Then you add in, the how you expect them to actually perform,
right,
or the odds to win the conference, and Kansas is again the highest there with Kansas State right behind them.
Yeah.
Obviously things like SP Plus where you take in a little bit more than just, or I should say FPI is much more weighted towards returning production, which Kansas has a lot of returning production, which helps them a lot, I think, there. But I also think that, SP Plus also kind of underweights, I think, a lot of the defensive improvements and what we've kind of seen from Kansas defensively. So you kind of split the difference there. I do think that Kansas is going to be a team that's going to be in every single game. I would be shocked if they win less than 9 games this year. I just think that the way the schedule is set up, who they're playing in the non-conference, who they're playing in conference, and where they're playing them, it's hard to imagine this is a team that we're going to be looking at, middle of November and saying, hey, I think they're out of the Big 12 conference race.
Right.
It's going to be, hey, what do they need to have happen so that they have a shot to go to the college football playoff this year?
Yeah, sure.
I very easily see them at least being 11-1. Like that's kind of my, I don't want to say floor. I think my floor for them is like 10-2. Maybe 9-3 if something weird happens.
Yes, I mean, knowing the injury history of this team, like they have yet to, since Leipold's been here, and actually even before that, but Leipold has yet to have a quarterback, a starting quarterback, finish the year as a starter. Well, with the exception of, Jalen Daniels, he was a starter, but he was out for a decent amount and then came back.
Right. Sure.
But still, they have had had to have multiple starters over the course of the year. And so you kind of have to think that there's a decent likelihood that Isaiah Marshall, as the primary backup, is probably going to have one start this year.
Right.
The question is, where is it going to be? Is it going to be a game that, having him in there instead of Daniels could be the difference in them winning or losing the game? Or is it going to be one of those playing against Houston or playing against Arizona State where you think that, hey, if he's the guy that's there, you probably are still good enough to win that one pretty comfortably. So, there is enough uncertainty. And I think that that's a lot of what college football is in general now.
Yeah.
You have that depth because people are getting injured more, as people are getting more physically, physically capable. They're also much more physically capable of inflicting injuries on people,
right,
completely unintentionally. But, so I think you do have to kind of worry about that. But Kansas does have enough, I think. And the other worry with this team had been the offensive line. But they have a lot of guys that have come in. They have some really good high school recruits. They have some really good transfer guys, headlined by Bryce Foster from Texas A&M, just, committing, probably going to take that center position for the Jayhawks. That was kind of the one spot that you were worried about because Mike Nowitzki graduated and he had held down the center. You have a guy in Michael Ford who was going to step in and has played some center before. but is much more naturally a guard. And so you kind of solidify multiple spots on the line with the way that those guys have come in. You have multiple offensive tackle guys that have come in. Like, you've got a lot more in the cupboard now to be able to put together a good offensive line. And that's what we've seen from Kansas every single year, is that they take a ton of pieces and somehow put together a really good line.
Yep.
And, Kansas now had 2 years in a row where their left tackle has gone on to, have some sort of impact or be drafted in some fashion in the NFL. So you have, Earl Bostic, who went 2 years ago, and then you have Dominic Mooney, who went this last year in the third round. So, you're looking at a good history from this staff of being able to put together a good offensive line.
Sure.
The real question is just, what is the ceiling for the team?
Right. Yeah. Now I noticed that you threw in Arizona State in there. You talked about Houston and Kansas State. You didn't talk about Colorado. Are you?
You worried about?
You worried about Colorado at all?
No, I'm really.
It was one of those where, one, that's late enough in the season that I think that
Careful with your words, man.
I'm going to give Colorado the benefit of the doubt that they could probably put a competitive team together.
Sure,
but it's going to be senior day for the Jayhawks.
Sure.
It's going to be in Arrowhead.
Okay.
It's going to be the last time that Jalen Daniels, Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw, like all of those offensive players that have been the heart and soul of this team for so long, that's their final time playing in front of the home crowd. I guarantee you that game is not going to be particularly.
It's going to mean it's going to be a lot.
Unless Colorado shocks everybody and is like 8-2 at that point or something like that. I don't expect that game to really be particularly competitive, just because it's Colorado. I think will get there eventually. They have quite a ways.
Yeah. I'm always curious. I just see so many people talking about how good Colorado is when they have 40-something transfers out, 40-something transfers in, and I'm just always curious how the people who are going to play them feel.
As we've seen, though, I mean, Kansas has done a good job with the transfer portal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do think it's a lot harder. It's still just as hard, I think, to base a team entirely off the transfer portal. It's a lot easier now, I think, to get guys in the portal.
Sure.
And it's definitely a much bigger portion of what your recruiting has to be. You have to be able to recruit the portal. But much like with Kansas, with basketball in general, you cannot focus only on the portal.
100%.
You don't have those guys, that are coming in from high school that are kind of building that, for the program. And
the culture there.
You rank guys for 1 or 2 years. It's hard to build the kind of the consistent program that you want that's going to have a consistent identity. It's just, antithetical to what a lot of teams actually really want to do. And so I think that it's great while, Dion is trying to establish what he wants to have at Colorado.
Sure.
But he's not going to be able to continue to rely on transfers that much and actually put together good teams year in and year out. So we'll see if he can, back his way into one this year. Everyone said that they were going to be great last year, and, they had a big upset win over TCU, a TCU team that turned out to not be anywhere near as good as people thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
That's like, we've seen this before from Colorado, where they get a lot of early props, and then everything falls apart. Not saying it's definitely going to happen, but I would not be shocked, especially with, like you said, how competitive the Big 12 is. It's not like we're going to get into a situation where Colorado is completely outclassed talent-wise, but they're also not going to be significantly better than 4 or 5 teams in the conference because of how close everybody is.
Yeah, that TCU upset really got less and less of an upset the further on in the season we got.
So, right.
But now, as a Kansas, one of the last questions I'll ask you here, you've got all these people, not everybody's paying attention to Kansas football, right? What is something that you, like, if you were just going to say, hey, this is Kansas football, what would that, like, Kansas message, I guess you could say, to college football be? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I haven't really thought too much about it. I mean, I think this is a team that is used to being overlooked and used to kind of being in the shadow, even though, it's one of the few places in all of college sports where the college basketball team makes more money than the college football team. And
you probably have gone to, yeah.
Well, right. But it's like one of like 3 places, I think, where that actually happened. Kentucky, I believe, is the other one. So, like, they are used to being overlooked, and a lot of that has been their fault, in terms of how well the team has performed. But they have a very dedicated, hardcore fan base I actually used to write with a guy who he was a Kansas football fan, was not really a fan of the basketball team, didn't really care about basketball. Like, they have plenty of those people that are invested and are just looking for a reason to care. And the fact that they have that, you're starting to see that. People were surprised with the way that they were able to, put the financing together for the stadium. And I think there's a lot of people that are kind of upset about that. And most of them are rival fans that are worried potentially about what that might mean moving forward. But this is a team that is ready to show everybody what they're able to do. And they have a core group of guys who have been here. Yeah. And this is a program that, honestly, as bad as they've been for the last 10 years, every single year they've had a core group of guys that have been, we are the ones that want to be the ones that turn this around. And now that it's finally here, where they've turned it around and where people are starting to get respect. I mean, last time Kansas was ranked in the preseason coming into the year, as everybody expects them to be this year, Mark Mangino had just won the Orange Bowl. So, the expectation here is that this is a team that now is going to have an opportunity to actually make some noise. Mm-hmm. And as Bill Self put it when College Game Day came to town, it's like, this will always be a basketball school, but it's also a football school now. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of the big message, that this is a football school now. You are going to find plenty of people that are very committed. And the fact that Kansas is now competing nationally for recruits and, it's getting to the point where people recognize what they're doing, it's going to be, I think, a whole lot different. This is not going to be the Kansas that you're used to thinking about from the last 15 years.
True. So I'm going to sum that up as look out. Look out, college football.
Plenty, as some of the biggest people on Twitter who cover who follow the Jayhawks, are talking about, the Hawks are coming.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So I picked up on the message pretty well. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Andy, we really appreciate you coming on with us. Before we head out, can you just let everybody know how to find you, how to find the podcast, all that good stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me over on Twitter personally at AndyMitz12. Not only do I cover the Jayhawks, I'm also part of the 10-12 podcast network. I started that network with a friend who had a Big 12 centric podcast. And so it's an entire collection of podcasts dedicated specifically to Big 12 programs. So definitely recommend checking that out if you can. Yep. That is at 1012 Network on Twitter. But the podcast itself is Rock Chalk Podcast at Rock Chalk Pod on Twitter. And I do also cover the team over I have actually in the process of transitioning sites, but I do have a bunch of writings. So follow me personally to get links to all of that. But I will definitely be updating stuff as it goes. Tons of coverage. We are in the middle of a 100-day countdown to Kansas football, where we do a football-related article every single day.
Cool.
Been doing that for like 4 years. Yeah. We used to do that back when Kansas was awful coming out.
Probably a little easier to write about them now.
Oh, it's 100 days to it now than it used to be. Right. Now it's like, how many ideas do I want to talk about? Right. I keep figure out where to put them in the schedule. Whereas before it was like, I have to talk about them again. Like, what am I going to say that people are actually going to read?
What's different about today?
Right, exactly. Yeah, they got a basketball player.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we'll make sure everything is down below in our description. There we go. So go down there.
Look at it. To your point, though, gone are the days when the biggest football story was that the football tight end became a walk.
Yeah, those are over. Look out.
Now when people hear Kobe, they think of a cornerback.
That's right. Well, awesome. Well, again, Andy, thank you so much. You guys make sure you go and you follow Andy and the 1012 podcast, all that kind of stuff, the podcast network. And we'll see you next time. We appreciate it, Andy.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.